Reading Uni Weather.
Hi, I'm Simon and I'm going to bring you a little look at some of the factors which could influence our weather through this winter. So first, if we take a look at the weather pattern which drives the two types of winter that we tend to see in the UK. This is called the North Atlantic Oscillation, and what it depends on is the strength of the vortex that forms during the winter over the Arctic in the stratosphere. When we have a strong vortex, such as here, we have a positive North Atlantic Oscillation, and this drives a very strong Atlantic jet stream, bringing in those mild westerly winds which we associate with our temperate climate. However, in some years we see a breakdown of the vortex with what's known as a sudden stratospheric warming event, and this tends to cause a very wavy, weak jet stream, and we get polar easterlies which bring cooler conditions, and we tend to see a bit more snow. So which one of these could we expect to see in the upcoming winter? Well, the big driver in the world's weather at the moment is this really strong El Niño event in the Pacific, one of the top two strongest on record. And though there's no direct link to the weather type that we receive in the UK, as there are in some other parts of the world, it does tend to cause a greater risk of stratospheric warming events, vortex breakdowns and cooler conditions late on in the winter, as you can maybe see from this suggestion here of cooler conditions in Scandinavia in January and February. But looking closer to home, throughout 2015 we've seen very cool conditions persist in the sea surface temperatures across the North Atlantic. This Atlantic cold blob has recently combined itself with very warm temperatures across the tropical Atlantic, and what this does is increase the temperature gradient as we move polewards. Now what we would expect this to do is increase the strength of the Atlantic jet stream, so bringing about a positive North Atlantic Oscillation and mild conditions through the winter. But if we move back into the stratosphere, this time over the equator, we can look at this pretty horrible looking black and white chart, but it just shows the quasi-biennial oscillation, or QBO, which oscillates between westerly and easterly phases. At the moment, we're in a westerly phase, and this is linked with a decreased risk of stratospheric warming events, so suggests a mild winter ahead. The sun is also something which we should consider when looking at the winter, as some research suggests low sunspot numbers, such as what we saw between these two solar cycles around 2008, can cause the negative Arctic oscillation and cooler conditions. But at the moment we're midway through a solar cycle, sunspot numbers roughly average, so we wouldn't expect it to cause much of an impact. So now I've talked enough about the patterns, let's see what the models think. This is the Cfs model from Noaa in the US, and it suggests a very strong Atlantic jet stream with low pressure to the northwest of the UK, high pressure over the Mediterranean, and an anomalous southwesterly flow, so mild conditions. The Met Office's Glossy 5 model paints nearly exactly the same picture, with another very strong Atlantic jet stream and westerly conditions. And, although I've oriented it much more helpfully than the Japanese did because they focused it on Japan, so hence the weird looking graph, the Japanese model paints nearly the same picture again. And it's pretty remarkable to get such good agreement between three completely different forecast models. They do all suggest, though, when looking at individual months rather than these 3-month composites, that the winter will be cooler later on, so that's something to bear in mind. If we summarise then, El Niño tends to cause a positive North Atlantic Oscillation and mild conditions early on in the winter, and perhaps some more vortex breakdown events through stratospheric warmings late on. So if it does have an impact, we're looking at cool conditions towards January, February. The strengthened jet stream in the Atlantic because of that cold blob, we would expect to cause more mild conditions, and the QBO could help do that too. So if I am going to make a forecast, it's something along the lines of expect mild, wet conditions December and January, and then perhaps through a stratospheric warming event we could see some cooler conditions, drier conditions, and probably a risk of more snow in February. But don't take that for granted. And I'm going to leave you now with my all-time favourite graph, which is from a paper by Baldwin and Dunkerton in 2001 and shows the effect of those stratospheric events down from the top of the atmosphere to the surface. Thank you.
Reading Uni Weather.